Let's get one thing straight. Baphomet was never meant to be your Halloween monster or the devil's poster child. Eliphas Levi, a deeply mystical and polarizing figure in occultism, introduced this powerful archetype in Dogma and ritual of high magic, not to invoke fear, but to ignite wisdom. This goat-headed, androgynous figure blends duality, symbolism, and divine intelligence into a single image. Carl Jung would have likely seen it not as a demon, but as a symbol of individuation, an encounter with the shadow to awaken the self. And let's be honest, anything that blends sacred feminine and sacred masculine into one entity is bound to disturb a world built on separation. The reason Baphomet scares so many is simple. It holds a mirror to our unconscious. Its body is a mosaic of symbols. Wings and goat legs, human breasts, and a torch-crowned head, all standing firm between heaven and earth. It's a spiritual Rorschach test. People see in it what they fear most in themselves. And yet, Baphomet is less about devils and more about diagrams, sacred geometry incarnate. Just as a pentagram contains infinite symbolic layers, this figure distills the alchemical process of solve et coagula, to dissolve illusion and reform truth. You could say Levi used Baphomet as a philosophical grenade. He took the dualities, good and evil, light and dark, masculine and feminine, and packed them into a single spiritual archetype. Much like Jung's archetypes, this being wasn't literal, but psychic, an external expression of an inner reality. The androgyny wasn't for shock value, but to remind us, wholeness requires integration. Anyone serious about alchemy, psychology, or spiritual evolution must eventually face what this image represents. There's a reason the initiate is taught not to fear symbols, but to understand them. Baphomet, like the unconscious, speaks in riddles, metaphors, and archetypes. And if you're willing to go beyond appearances, it offers a roadmap out of confusion. Eliphas Levi didn't create a monster. He gave birth to a mystical diagram of inner transformation. You can't decode it with dogma or superstition. You need symbolic literacy, patience, and the courage to look within. So when someone scoffs at Baphomet, maybe they're really recoiling from their own shadow. In Jungian psychoanalysis, projection is always a dead giveaway. What Levi gave us wasn't a new demon. It was a sacred mirror. And once you stop running from the image, you begin to see what it's pointing toward, a deeper philosophical lineage tied to history, myth, and a very specific church in Paris. Historical and cultural roots. You know what's wild? The most feared symbol in occult lore might have started as a rain gutter. That's right. Many believe the inspiration for Baphomet's visual form came from a grotesque gargoyle carved into the western portal of St. Mary Church in Paris. Crafted during the church's 19th century renovation, this mythic figure wasn't placed there to summon demons, but to repel them. Gothic architecture often used such monstrous guardians as reminders of divine justice, a visual form of spiritual purification. It's like ancient psychological warfare. Face your fears on the way to the altar. Now, Eliphas Levi didn't randomly conjure Baphomet out of thin air. He was a student of Hermeticism, alchemy, and mystical philosophy, and he drew from history with surgical precision. The image of the goat-headed deity shares uncanny visual parallels with this St. Mary gargoyle, suggesting Levi may have borrowed from what was already embedded in the religious psyche of France. Ironically, a Christian church may have helped shape one of esotericism's most misunderstood symbols. That's the dance of duality right there. Then there's the whole drama with the Knights Templar. If you've heard the name Baphomet in historical whispers, it's probably from the 14th century trials where the Templars were accused of heresy and idol worship. What do they supposedly worship? You guessed it, Baphomet. But here's the twist. There's zero evidence they actually did. The accusation likely masked deeper political motives. Still, That accusation fused the name Baphomet with blasphemy in the cultural memory, making it a scapegoat, pun absolutely intended. This historical scapegoating is eerily similar to how societies project their collective shadow. Carl Jung would have recognized the Templars' persecution as a ritualized projection of societal fear. What better way to hide your own corruption than to burn someone else as a heretic? Levi seemed to grasp this too. By reinterpreting Baphomet through the lens of Gnosticism, magic, and universal dogma, he aimed to reclaim what had been distorted for centuries. His message? Symbols evolve, but only the wise can read them. So next time someone points at Baphomet and cries evil, remind them its roots are tangled in churches, knights, and power struggles, not satanic rites. And if Levi was right, then this figure isn't a warning sign of darkness, but a breadcrumb trail leading back to hidden wisdom. Especially once we start looking at what those symbols mean astrologically and alchemically. Alchemical and astrological symbolism in the Baphomet image. Look closely at Baphomet, and you'll see more than horns and wings. You'll find a calendar hidden in its curves. Eliphas Levi embedded astrological references into the image, most notably Aries and Taurus, two powerful zodiac signs connected to alchemy. The horns, shaped like a ram, and the circle formed by the wings gesture toward spring, specifically the months of April and May. Why? Because that's when the alchemist would collect dew, nature's sacred solvent. Dew wasn't just water. It was seen as the celestial sperm, a vehicle for spirit to impregnate matter. This dew, or aqua, was gathered at dawn on linen sheets, twisted into glass jars, and distilled to extract what was called the sal precioso. It's as poetic as it is practical. This wasn't just chemistry, it was spiritual work. In the Baphomet figure, we see this transformation illustrated in the arms labeled solve and coagula, to dissolve and to bind, to fragment and to unite. These weren't just operations on physical matter. They symbolize psychological transformation too. Dissolve illusions, crystallize truth. It's like baking bread for the soul. First, you break things down. You burn off the impurities. Then, slowly, you rebuild something sacred. This is where the magic of alchemy intersects with the path of individuation in Carl Jung's psychoanalysis. The solve phase correlates to confronting the shadow, while coagula echoes the reintegration of the self. Baphomet isn't just sitting there. It's teaching silently with each symbolic limb. That torch between its horns? It's sacred fire, the divine wisdom that arises after the trials of purification. Even the body of Baphomet reflects these principles. The goat form grounds it in earth, while the wings lift it towards spirit. It's the alchemical marriage, the sacred geometry of above and below. Aries represents fire, impulse, initiation. Taurus is earth, stability, form. Together, they tell the story of transformation, from chaos to cosmos. Levi wasn't drawing a monster. He was encoding a map, a visual key to inner transmutation, if you have the eyes to see. And now that you've seen the chemistry within this symbol, what happens when that alchemical becomes conscious? What does it mean when the magician stops reading symbols and starts shaping reality? The function of the alchemist magus is not just to observe, but to command. The function of the alchemist magician. The true alchemist isn't just mixing herbs in a flask. He's remixing reality itself. Eliphas Levi believed that the magician's role was to interact with a light astral, that invisible force which saturates our world with meaning, memory, and mystery. Much like Carl Jung's view of the unconscious, the light astral is a sea of archetypes, symbols, and psychic residue. But here's the twist. While most of us are tossed around by it, the magician learns to surf it. To solve et coagula is to dismantle what no longer serves and crystallize a new form aligned with will. This magical will isn't fantasy. It's a focused, disciplined intention, a force that bends the subtle matter of reality. Ever tried setting a deep intention during meditation or prayer and watched your world shift afterward? That's a glimpse of the alchemical function. Levi didn't separate psychology from mysticism. He knew that transformation must begin in the psyche before it ever manifests in the lab or the world. So when you purify your habits, your desires, your thought forms, that's alchemy. That's the real fire of transformation. Take the practice of dew collection again, not just a poetic act, but a metaphor for subtle attention. The spagyarist wakes before dawn, ready to collect that which most people miss entirely. Likewise, the modern magician cultivates awareness, discipline, and silence to perceive what others dismiss. Want to apply this? Start by tracking your emotional reactions like an alchemist tracks temperature shifts. Keep a dream journal. Practice mindful speech. These aren't soft habits. They're rituals of refinement, sacred operations on the substance of the soul. This is where the archetype of Baphomet comes to life. The figure itself is the alchemist embodied, hybrid, complex, paradoxical. It doesn't deny the material world, it purifies it. It doesn't flee from shadow, it integrates it. The arms inscribed with salve and coagula aren't symbolic accessories. They're instructions. You're meant to break down your illusions, then build something solid, sacred, and new. It's the sacred geometry of personal growth encoded in gesture. So while others fear the symbols, the alchemist magus acts. He knows magic isn't entertainment, it's evolution. And once that intention is lit like the torch on Baphomet's head, the next step becomes clear. Understand the laws behind the mystery. Understand Levi's metaphysical blueprint. Eliphas Levi's metaphysical philosophy. Eliphas Levi wasn't just drawing sigils and summoning spirits. He was drafting a metaphysical architecture. At the heart of his philosophy lies the idea of a universal dogma, one primal truth veiled behind the fragmented symbols of all religions. Levi believed that beneath Catholic doctrine, Gnostic myth, and Hermetic ritual pulsed a single current of divine wisdom. Much like Carl Jung's collective unconscious, this dogma was a psychic inheritance, accessible not by blind belief, but through initiation, discernment, and deep spiritual work. This universal dogma isn't something you memorize, it's something you realize. It's what remains when you burn away superstition and strip symbols down to their sacred geometry. Levi called this the wisdom of the ancients, and it included everything from alchemical transmutation to magical will. You see this clearly in Dogma and Ritual of High Magic, where he shows how ritual isn't just performance, it's philosophy in action. Magic becomes a form of embodied metaphysics, a dance between the self and the cosmos. What's radical is Levi's refusal to separate science from faith. He saw them as two expressions of the same truth, one through measurement, the other through meaning. That alone sets him apart from modern spiritual fluff. To Levi, the light astral was a scientific field, a force to be studied, mapped, and utilized. This isn't unlike Jung exploring synchronicity or libido as archetypal energies. The overlap between magic and psychoanalysis isn't a stretch, it's a reunion. The magician and the analyst are both decoding the soul. And like any great system, Levi's metaphysics has a mythic fall. He believed that early humanity was closer to this sacred truth, that ancient initiates once held the key to divine order. But as time passed, that key was lost and the dogma fragmented. Different cultures picked up different pieces, forming the various religions we see today. The initiate's task, therefore, is to recover the whole, to piece together what history broke apart. This requires not just study, but vision. Not just knowledge, but symbolic literacy. So when someone mocks esotericism as primitive or outdated, Levi's philosophy stares back and says, "You've forgotten where your truths began. And once you remember that, once you feel that primal thread connecting all wisdoms, you're ready to grapple with the very substance of manifestation, the nature of the light astral itself." The nature of astral light. Astral light isn't some poetic metaphor. It's the metaphysical bloodstream of reality. Eliphas Levi saw it as the raw, magnetic field that absorbs every image, every emotion, every intention ever projected into the world. Think of it as psychic gravity, pulling in the symbols we emit and saturating the world with meaning. For Carl Jung, this echoes the collective unconscious, a place where archetypes live and myths breathe. But unlike Jung's concept, Levi emphasized the plasticity of this force. It doesn't just store information, it responds to will. Here's the unsettling part. Astral light is neutral. It doesn't care whether you're summoning angels or fueling your shadow. It reflects your intention like a cosmic mirror. That's why magical ethics are non-negotiable. If you manipulate this field with ignorance or greed, it can magnify your distortion just as easily as it can magnify your light. This is what Levi meant when he said the same images can lead to salvation or damnation. It all depends on the magician's consciousness. In short, your inner chaos doesn't stay contained. It echoes. And because astral light is saturated with images, it's easy to mistake reflections for reality. That's where illusion creeps in. We think we're seeing truth, but often we're just seeing echoes of past impressions, ours or others. This is why discernment is everything. You have to learn to see with the inner eye, not the reactive one. Want a practical start? Begin with dream interpretation. Not the cheesy kind. Use Jung's method. Track recurring symbols. Trace them to your personal mythology. That's you reading the astral map. Levi wasn't naive. He knew this force was overwhelming, especially in a world addicted to spectacle. Most people are drowning in reflected light. TV screens, social media, gossip. He urged the initiate to step back, isolate, and cleanse the psyche. Why? Because only a purified vessel can work with the light astral without being possessed by it. This isn't some aesthetic suggestion. It's survival advice for the spiritual path. You want clarity? You got to stop absorbing noise and start filtering truth. So if the astral light is a saturated field of symbols, the next question becomes urgent. Who's actually equipped to navigate it? Who's prepared to separate real illumination from seductive illusions? Enter the initiate, the one who dares to discern. The role of the initiate. The world doesn't need more believers. It needs more initiates. Eliphas Levi made it clear. The initiate isn't someone who joins a club or wears a robe. The initiate is the one who commits to seeing beyond appearances, who refuses to be hypnotized by mass consciousness. This person doesn't just study symbolism, they live it. Like Carl Jung's individuation process, initiation is the journey of extracting the self from the noise of archetypes, projections, and cultural programming. It's less Hogwarts and more spiritual boot camp. You can't separate truth from illusion if you've never tasted silence. Levi stressed that isolation isn't about being alone. It's about stepping away from the mass psyche long enough to hear your own will again. Just like a drop of propolis diluted in a bowl of water loses its potency, your spiritual clarity fades when immersed in societal distraction. So what can you do? Try a media fast for 3 days. Journal your thoughts. Then reread a sacred text, the Kybalion, the Red Book, or even Dogma and Ritual of High Magic. Notice what hits differently. The initiate's work is deeply ethical. Because once you start moving astral light, once you engage magical will, you're no longer invisible to the field. Every intention leaves a trace. That's why Levi said the magician needs both instruction and will. Without knowledge, you fumble in the dark. Without will, you remain passive, a pawn in your own spiritual drama. The path of initiation demands both spine and surrender, strength to move forward, and humility to admit how little you truly know. And let's not forget, initiation is not a one-time event. It's not conferred by a master or marked by a ceremony. It's a cycle, a spiral path that requires you to constantly return to the self, to the shadow, and to the source. Every lesson deepens your gaze, refines your discernment, and expands your inner fire. You become more attuned to sacred geometry, more aware of energetic shifts, more sensitive to symbolic truths. Over time, life stops being random. It becomes revelatory. So the initiate learns to navigate the light astral not as a tourist, but as a map maker. But even the best map is useless without philosophical grounding. And that's why Levi reached deep into Platonic thought and ancient metaphysics to root his magical vision in something eternal. Philosophical and Platonic foundations. Before there was Jung, before there was Freud, there was Plato, standing like a lighthouse in the fog of Western thought. Eliphas Levi drank deeply from that well. He saw Platonic philosophy not as abstract theory, but as a roadmap for the soul's return to truth. At the core of this vision lies the distinction between forms and reflections, a concept Jung echoed in his understanding of archetypes and symbols. Levi applied it to magic. The world we see isn't reality. It's a mirage of astral impressions, a theater of shadows on the cave wall. You're not interacting with the world as it is. You're interacting with your simile of it. Levi pointed to Plato's Theaetetus, where Socrates likens memory to a wax tablet. Every experience, every perception, every trauma leaves a print. But that print isn't the thing itself. It's a symbolic echo, one filtered through the layers of the psyche, the shadow, and the light astral. The magician, then, is tasked with a nearly impossible mission: to pierce the veil of these illusions and touch the eternal flame hidden behind the symbols. That's why sacred symbols, like the pentagram or the Hermes caduceus, held such weight for Levi. They weren't decorations, they were blueprints. The pentagram, for example, maps the human microcosm, but also represents the fragmentation of divine unity into countless traditions. Each limb of the pentagram is a religion. The head, the original universal dogma. Once you understand that, the initiate's job becomes clear. Reverse the dispersion, reunify the self, re-enter the sacred center. This isn't just philosophy, it's inner engineering. So how do you begin to distinguish the original light from its shadowy echoes? Levi said it plainly: discern light from reflex. You develop symbolic literacy. You meditate, yes, but you also study. Read Plotinus, revisit the Phaedrus, trace the Hermetic lineage that connects Egypt to Alexandria to the Renaissance. Philosophical grounding isn't optional. It's spiritual scaffolding. It holds your house up when the winds of illusion blow through your psyche. And as your inner foundation strengthens, your understanding of Baphomet deepens too. Suddenly, that goat-headed figure isn't just strange, it's necessary. It holds the iconography of sacred paradox. The goat's head and the torch, the breasts and the wings, all whisper truths to the one who's learned to listen. Iconographic analysis of the Baphomet figure. Let's talk anatomy, esoteric anatomy, that is. Every line in the Baphomet image was intentional, and Eliphas Levi designed it as a layered map of inner and outer worlds. Take the goat's head. It's not there to shock. It's a stand-in for the material realm, for that dense, earthy experience where spirit is tested and purified. According to Levi, the goat symbolizes the realm of expiation, the terrain where the soul confronts matter. Carl Jung might call it the arena of shadow work, where the self grinds against the limitations of the ego to awaken latent archetypes. Then there's the torch, blazing right between the horns. That's no candle. It's sacred fire, the divine intelligence that transcends the animalistic. It represents the light of initiation, what Levi saw as divine wisdom beaming from the crown of matter. Just above the pentagram, which itself points upward in this version, we witness the full arc, body, mind, and soul ascending toward the infinite. The pentagram isn't just a shape, it's a microcosmic reminder that man, properly aligned, channels divine will through flesh and bone. Now, let's get to the paradox. The human breasts on a goat-bodied entity. That androgyny isn't shock art, it's sacred symbolism. It represents wholeness, the integration of sacred feminine and sacred masculine, anima and animus, eros and logos. In Jungian language, this figure embodies individuation, becoming whole by embracing opposites. Levi wanted the viewer to see beyond gender and beast, to recognize that real transformation doesn't reject polarity, it harmonizes it. The Baphomet is both nurturer and challenger, creation and destruction, the mother and the fire. Don't overlook the seated posture, either. Baphomet isn't in motion. It sits balanced, calm, embodying cosmic equilibrium. This stillness isn't passivity, it's poise. Think of a yogi in full lotus or the alchemist before the flame. Everything in this figure screams one word: mastery. Mastery over body, over instincts, over duality. This is the posture of one who has seen the labyrinth and walked it through. And that's not just aspirational, it's instructional. Levi is saying, this is what it looks like to do the work. Each piece of this image serves a function, an invocation, a blueprint, a provocation. But it's not done speaking yet, because once you've grasped its posture and poise, your eye is drawn to the crescent moons, the serpents of Hermes, the wings, symbols that complete the mystical equation. Dual moons, caduceus, and wings. If the upper half of Baphomet is a lesson in divine fire, the lower half whispers secrets of polarity. Let's start with the moons, one waxing, one waning, resting beneath the figure's thighs. Levi positioned them there not by accident, but by ancient design. These moons represent mercy and justice, the ebb and flow of cosmic law. Think of them as the metaphysical tides that pull at the soul's journey, reminding us that light and shadow are part of one dance. Just like Jung's anima and animus, they're not opposites, they're complements. And where does Baphomet point? One arm to each moon. That gesture? That's sacred geometry in motion. It's not about choosing between them. It's about recognizing their interdependence. The initiate doesn't cling to mercy and reject justice, or vice versa. They hold both, just like life holds both growth and decay, clarity and confusion. If you've ever had to say no to something you loved or yes to something you feared, you've danced with these forces. The moons are symbols, but they also echo every moral decision you've ever made. Now look just beneath the waist, the caduceus of Hermes. In place of the generative organ, Levi placed two intertwining serpents around a central rod. This isn't repression, it's sublimation. It represents the transmutation of sexual energy into spiritual energy, the alchemical elevation of instinct into insight. Jung explored this too in the tension of opposites within libido, the urge that fuels both destruction and creation. The caduceus says, bring your passions to the altar. Don't kill them, transform them. The wings add another layer, an invitation to transcend. They're not just decorations. They symbolize the power to rise above the density of form. And yet, notice, Baphomet doesn't soar. It could, but it chooses stillness. That's the real mastery, resting at the center of polarity, embodying choice rather than compulsion. The wings remind you that flight is possible. The goat legs remind you that grounding is necessary. Together, they form the fulcrum between becoming and being. And this brings us to a deeper tension that haunted Levi's time and continues to echo now. The split between exoteric religion and esoteric knowledge. Because some truths were kept hidden. Some images, like Baphomet, weren't meant for all eyes. They were veiled, guarded, encrypted. And in the secret archives of the Templars, Baphomet wasn't a threat. It was a teacher. Gnosticism and the hidden doctrine of the Templars. Not all doctrines are meant for the crowd, and the Knights Templar knew this well. According to Eliphas Levi, their teachings were divided in two, one for public eyes, the other for initiates alone. On the surface, they upheld Catholic doctrine, but behind closed doors, they practiced Johannism, a mystical branch of Gnosticism laced with Hermeticism and sacred symbols. Baphomet, in this context, wasn't heresy, it was a cipher, a symbol to preserve higher truths in a world unready to hear them. You can call it secret knowledge, but to the initiated, it was simply the real curriculum. Now, let's get something straight. Levi didn't claim the Templars worshiped Baphomet as a god. He suggested they revered the image as a vessel, something like a metaphysical diagram. In fact, he goes so far as to say that those who looked at Baphomet and saw a devil were profanes. But those who truly contemplated it, they saw the god of Plato, Spinoza, the mystics of Alexandria, and the god Pan, the great all. That kind of reframe flips everything. Baphomet isn't the beast, it's the bridge. Gnostic thought always challenged orthodoxy. Where religion offered hierarchy, Gnosticism offered initiation. Where doctrine demanded obedience, Gnosticism demanded awakening. The Templars likely knew this. That's why Levi insisted their real sin wasn't the worship of Baphomet, but the exposure of sacred mysteries to the unprepared. Imagine showing someone a nuclear reactor without explaining what it is. They'd think it was a weapon. Same with sacred symbols. Without initiation, people panic. They project. They persecute. Carl Jung understood this danger too. He warned that the unconscious, when left unintegrated, turns sacred archetypes into monsters. Levi was doing the same thing with his defense of the Templars. He was protecting the sacred from distortion, while also warning those who approached it carelessly. In the wrong hands, a key becomes a blade. Baphomet was never the enemy. It was a mirror, and those who couldn't stand their reflection called it evil. But once you realize Baphomet is not the devil, the real challenge begins, facing the fear that made you believe it was. Because the greatest danger isn't in the symbol, it's in the mass mind that misunderstands it. And Levi had sharp words for that kind of collective confusion. Levi's critique of religious literalism and mass consciousness. Eliphas Levi didn't just challenge superstition, he tore its mask off. His critique of religious literalism wasn't aimed at faith itself, but the blind obedience that turns sacred teachings into dogmatic prisons. He saw how institutional religion had stripped symbols of their mystical depth, turning powerful archetypes like Baphomet into scapegoats for fear and ignorance. Much like Carl Jung's analysis of projection, Levi knew that what we call evil is often just misunderstood energy, our own shadow cast on the wall of dogma. One of Levi's most striking metaphors is the drop of propolis in a bowl of water. A single drop, potent and pure, loses its essence when diluted. He used this to illustrate what happens when a soul merges with the masses. In a crowd, we lose our edge, our clarity, our purpose. The initiate must pull back, not out of arrogance, but out of necessity. Mass consciousness drowns nuance. And when symbols are reduced to surface meanings, we mistake the map for the territory. We call the mirror a monster. Levi believed this dilution was why people fear figures like Baphomet. They don't study, they assume. They don't meditate, they react. This is why reclaiming spiritual sovereignty matters. Want a practical step? Read sacred texts across traditions, the Gospel of Thomas, the Emerald Tablet, the Upanishads. Then ask, what do these symbols share? Where do they point? That's how you begin peeling back the layers. That's how you start reclaiming the original light from its distorted reflections. And it's not just about religion. Levi's warning echoes into politics, media, and even modern spirituality. Mass consciousness is always ready to crucify what it doesn't understand. The magician, the mystic, the philosopher, they must walk a quieter path. Not isolated but insulated. Not hiding truth, but protecting it from misinterpretation. That's not elitism, it's guardianship. It's the responsibility that comes with spiritual power. So when Levi confronted religious literalism, he wasn't rejecting the sacred. He was defending it from corrosion. And once you reclaim that clarity, you're ready to approach the most overlooked power in magical practice, the faculty of imagination. Imagination as a magical tool. If there's one word modern minds underestimate, it's imagination. But Eliphas Levi saw it as the cornerstone of all magical operation, the gateway to the divine and the battleground of the soul. Forget the idea that imagination is just make-believe. For Levi, and for thinkers like Carl Jung, it's a faculty of vision, a tool to perceive the archetypes hidden behind reality's veil. The magus doesn't escape through imagination. They enter. They reach into the light astral and pull form from formlessness, like sculptors of the unseen. Imagine standing in front of Baphomet, not as a statue, but as a living mirror. Without imagination, you'd see a goat. With it, you'd see a map, one that illustrates your inner tensions, unintegrated archetypes, and hidden desires. Levi knew this power could overwhelm the untrained mind. That's why initiation matters. Without preparation, the imagination becomes chaotic, a hall of mirrors. But with discipline, it becomes a bridge to higher realities, a psychic lantern guiding the path to individuation. Think of Hieronymus Bosch's temptation of Saint Anthony, a visual onslaught of surreal demons, bizarre temptations, and sacred torments. It's not random. It's a portrait of the psyche caught in symbolic warfare. Levi pointed to that very image to describe the dangers of undisciplined imagination. Jung echoed this through the concept of psychic inflation, when someone touches the archetypal and loses their grounding. So how do you anchor your imagination? By studying sacred geometry, meditating on symbols, and journaling your inner visions with ruthless honesty. Imagination, used correctly, is a vessel for divine wisdom. It lets you see what words cannot express. When you visualize a ritual, feel an archetype, or hear an inner voice during meditation, that's not fantasy. That's the interface between your soul and the infinite. Levi believed the astral light responds to such visions. It's why visualization is core to magical work. But the key isn't just to imagine. It's to align imagination with magical will. Otherwise, you're just dreaming. So, as you strengthen this inner faculty, something starts to change. Symbols begin to speak. Your dreams become messages. Reality itself bends in small, synchronistic nods. And once your imagination is sharp enough, you're ready for the final test, spiritual discipline, the furnace where your inner gold is forged. Spiritual discipline and realization. Not everyone is meant to walk the path of the initiate. And that's not judgment, it's geometry. Eliphas Levi was clear. To wield true magical will, one must cultivate inner discipline like a blade, sharpened through solitude, forge in practice. This isn't about controlling others. It's about commanding your own impulses. The magician doesn't rise by chance, but through 1,000 silent acts of mastery. Jung called it individuation. Levi called it sanctum regnum. Either way, it's the royal art of becoming whole through sacred struggle. Here's the hard truth. Transformation hurts. It strips away illusions, uproots comfort, demands sacrifice. Levi insisted that without reform, there's no realization. You must outgrow your compulsions, your addictions, your need for validation. Start small. Cut one habit that feeds passivity. Replace it with a ritual that feeds clarity. Light a candle before bed. Meditate 5 minutes at dawn. Write your dreams for 7 days. The spiritual path doesn't begin in ecstasy. It begins in repetition. This discipline is not rigid asceticism. It's creative devotion. You're sculpting yourself into a vessel that can hold divine wisdom without leaking. That means discernment. That means restraint. That means staring down your own shadow and saying, "Not today." Levi was adamant. The magician must not be a slave to the passions of the world. You cannot serve the sacred and scroll endlessly through noise. You're either directing the current of astral light or being dragged by it. And then there's will. Levi didn't define will as desire. He meant direction, a steady flame that doesn't flicker in chaos. Will is what makes initiation stick. It's what binds insight to action. It's what pulls you back to your center when everything external tries to unseat you. Without will, you're just playing dress-up in mystic clothing. With it, you become a force of nature, a conscious conduit of sacred geometry and divine order. So no, this path isn't for everyone, and it's certainly not for the lazy. But if you've come this far, if Baphomet has begun to speak to you through symbol and silence, then perhaps you're ready. Because this isn't about theory anymore. It's about becoming. And from here on, everything changes. So now you know, Baphomet was never the villain. It was the veil, a symbol of cosmic balance, a diagram of the self, and a mirror for your inner contradictions. The real question is, what are you going to do with this knowledge? Will you let it be another fascinating concept that floats through your mind? Or will you integrate it, like the true initiate, into your daily practice, your mindset, your path? Have you looked at your own symbols lately? What do you project onto what you fear? What parts of yourself have you labeled as evil simply because no one ever taught you how to hold your own complexity? This isn't just philosophy. This is a tool set. Are you ready to separate light from reflection? Are you prepared to dissolve what no longer serves and crystallize a new self, forged in will and wisdom? If this message struck something deep inside you, then don't let it fade. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell because we're not done. This is just the first layer. We got more to uncover about magic, archetypes, Jungian psychology, and esoteric truth. And tell me in the comments, what part of the Baphomet archetype reflected something real back to you? I'm listening.